Hello again, writers. I hope you had fun yesterday looking over the story, 13 and a half, and learning some author moves so that we can start to think about what we want to use in our own pieces of realistic fiction. What we're looking at today is called a story arc, and it's really similar to a plot mountain, which I'm sure many of you are used to seeing or have seen and have worked with throughout elementary school and even in 6th grade. And so the story arc helps us do as writers is not only think about our story, because good writers think about their writing before they start to write. They think about their ideas and let them kind of process and stew before they put pen to paper or fingers to keyboard. So this helps us think about our story, but it also helps us plan the events of our text, our fiction text, because we know that any piece of fiction needs to have all the plot elements along with it. So it needs to have a setting or an exposition or introduction. It needs to have some rising action that leads us towards the climax of the story. And within that rising action is our problem or conflict. And then it needs to have some falling action and hopefully a resolution that gives the reader a sense of understanding. And within all of that, we will get things like dialogue and theme. But before we get to all that stuff, this story arc will help you plan out all the events of your text. So far, we've come up with some ideas for a piece of realistic fiction, and we've done a flash draft of a scene. And we've also done some brainstorming of conflicts or problems that your characters might have in this piece of realistic fiction, and we did a flash draft of that. And so what we're asking you to do is to come up with something like this that goes along with your idea for your story. So I'm going to read through this and then kind of explain how you can use this technique to start thinking more about your own piece of realistic fiction. So as you can see, it's an arc, just like the plot mountain. So at the beginning on the left, right here, we have the narrator, the main character. The narrator goes to Ashley's big fancy house. Remember, she was huffing and puffing up the stairs. Next is an event where Ashley gives narrator a tour and makes up a lot of rules. And we see the narrator starting to get more and more uncomfortable. This is why it's part of the rising action, because it's building tension in the story. Then we have Ashley talking a lot about Ashley talks a lot about her getting older and also her exotic bird. And there's this kind of build up to this bird. And then suddenly we know at the peak of the story or the climax, they find the bird has died. And then in the falling action of the story, we get this big revelation that the mother had been replacing the bird throughout her childhood. And it's kind of a big letdown. And then in that process, Ashley and the friend, our narrator, they have this bonding moment. And by the end, down here, we know that the narrator is now more compassionate and she's kinder to Ashley and has this new appreciation of her own life, wherein we kind of learn the message. Or the message or the lesson or the theme of the text. So this has a ton of moments in it. It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 events that have been included to map out the arc of the story. So what we're asking that you do now as writers is to spend some time thinking about your story idea and see if you can plot it out onto an arc of your own. So it should have an exposition, what's going to happen in the beginning, what's the moment of tension or like the sparking moment that kind of leads to some conflict in the story. And that can happen right here. And then the rising action can build us toward the conflict, or it can happen here. It's up to you. This is where you get to play around with the events. And then you want to have the peak moment or the climax of the story at the top. You want to have some falling action that wraps things up. And then finally, and a resolution. So how does the story resolved? Now, as a quick reminder, before you start to do this, remember that we're still trying to work on seed ideas. All right, we want these stories to be small moments. This story of 13 and a half takes place over maybe a couple of hours between the narrator and her friend Ashley at her home. It's not an entire day. It's not an entire week. You want to think of a small moment, maybe an hour, maybe a couple of hours, and see what you can explore with that small moment in time. And as always, if you need help, go ahead and check in with your teacher via Teams, and we'll be more than happy, to help you work through your story arc, or even help you work through some ideas that you're having for your piece of realistic fiction. I look forward to looking at your arcs, and happy Friday.